And on to this story now. Consumers in South Africa are not in a jolly shopping mood ahead of the festive season. That's according to the Consumer Confidence Index by FNB and the Bureau for Economic Research. According to the index, while consumer sentiment has remained higher compared to the very low levels recorded during the first half of 2023, the latest reading of -17 is the lowest festive season consumer confidence reading in more than 2 decades. In fact, the consumer confidence levels in the fourth quarter are lower than those observed during the COVID-19 pandemic. Siphamandla Mkhwanazi is a senior economist with FNB and he joins me now. Siphamandla, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Let's start with how exactly you measure consumer confidence levels in this particular index.
Right. Thank you for having me, Kulani, and good evening to your viewers. The FNB BR Consumer Confidence Index really just tries to measure or gauge the level of sentiment or the mood of the consumer, especially going into this festive season. It is grouped into 3 questions. The first question relates to the consumer's view about the future state of the economy, where the economy is going. The second question relates to their personal finances, how they are feeling about their personal finances, not necessarily the economy, but their personal finances. And the third one assesses whether the consumers are willing at the present moment to spend on big ticket items. So the combination of these 3 gives us a consumer confidence index, and it's used as a good indicator for household consumption expenditure in South Africa.
And Siphamandla, according to this index, both high-income households, those who are earning more than 20,000 rands per month, and middle-income households earning between 5,000 rands and 20,000 rands per month, have declined by 2 index points. What does that mean in terms of what you have just found?
Yes. So you would recall, Kolani, that the spending power in South Africa sits in the middle and all the way to the high end of the income scale, whereas volumes actually sit in the lower end of the income scale. So what we find here is that those that tend to be sensitive to interest rate changes, for example, to tax changes, are more despondent at the moment, whereas your lower income household at the moment is looking forward to the extension of the SRD grant, for instance, which has softened the blow of the high cost of living at the moment. We have also seen with the job generation of new jobs during this year, I mean over 800,000 jobs year to date have been created. Many of them in the tourism sector, which we know generally hires then towards the middle income household, towards the middle income earner, and in some parts of government as well, we've seen creation of jobs, especially in low-paying occupations. So at the moment, what it tells us is that the low-income consumer is feeling relatively better than your middle to high-income households. But what it means is that the spending power at the moment is relatively depressed, because that's where spending comes from, in the middle to high-income households. So we should be looking forward to a relatively subdued shopping activity in the festive season relative to the previous festive season. As you correctly point out, this is the lowest reading we had seen since 2000, that's 23 years.
And from what you've just said, Siphamandla, about middle income to high income households, this should be ringing some alarm bells. And does it explain the fact that we are now sitting with high interest rate, runaway inflation, and those middle to high income households are actually the ones who have access to debt, and they might find it harder to actually service their debt in the coming months?
That's exactly right, Polani. These are segments, as I mentioned, that are sensitive to changes in monetary policy. This is the usual monetary policy transmission mechanism that those that have access to credit markets, for instance, step back a little bit to cool the level of demand in the economy. So one could also say that the current mood that we are currently seeing has got in part is explained by the high levels of interest rates, and that should translate to lower spending, especially on interest rate sensitive goods such as buying of cars, luxury goods, as well as big ticket items, which we see has been lacking in South Africa, especially if you look at the latest GDP print, which shows that consumer spending declined by about 0.3% quarter on quarter in the third quarter. And that decline, the decline in spending was largely driven by that spending in durable goods. So what we are saying shouldn't really be a surprise. It's just a result, a natural consequence of the high interest rate, high inflation environment that we are currently in.
And with both the rich and the poor households crumbling under that financial pressure, is it a good thing or a bad thing that most consumers still feel that the present moment is not the right time to purchase big-ticket durable goods items, looking at how indebted households are at the moment?
Yeah, so that's what we find, Polani, that as much as, so out of the three questions at the beginning of the interview, we find that actually consumers are feeling a bit more upbeat about their personal finances. What they are mostly depressed about is just the state of the economy. And when you ask them whether now is the appropriate time for them to buy big ticket items, suddenly they're not willing. So as much as they are feeling relatively better about the state of their finances, they're not willing to spend at the moment. So it tells you that there could be an element of taking a precaution, that you don't know what the economy is going to do in the future. So I might as well save a little bit that I've got right now for that rainy day. So what we are really seeing is that the level of spending in the fourth quarter is likely to be lower than the level of spending in the third quarter, which then means that the expectations that the economy will rebound in the fourth quarter of this year should be a little bit purred by this result if the consumer is not willing to spend on big ticket items.
And there is a little bit of good news in this index, as it also says that sustained jobs growth heading into the festive season is there, especially in the tourism sector. That may have countered the adverse impact of the cost of living pressures on those low-income households in general.
Absolutely. And I might add to that if you look at the job creation from the public sector as well, it's largely been on those occupations that are on the lower end of the income scale. So here we are talking about occupations such as, the extended public works, the teacher assistants, and all of that. That's the kind of job creation that has been, generated in the public sector. And all of these, taking that public sector job creation, combining it with, just the resurgence in tourism, says that the lower end consumer is feeling a little bit better. So what that means for spending is that we are potentially going to see some level of support, not necessarily that consumers are going to go to town and spend, the spending levels are going to shoot the lights out, but it does mean that there is a floor to it at the very least, especially on the essentials, on your very necessary goods and your cheaper, luxury goods. So that's where we think activity is going to be, not so much on a very expensive or the high-end kind of spending that we have come to be accustomed to during this time of the year.
And it's quite important to also note that the index says that there's hope that the all-important Christmas gift-giving period will not be a complete whitewash, even with such a worrying consumer confidence number. Siphamandla Mkhwanazi, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. He is a senior economist at FNB.